Thick, swirling fog clung to the ancient stone walls like a jealous lover, wrapping the decrepit fortress in an impenetrable shroud. I arrived at dusk, when orange light flared behind the mountains, turning every silhouette into a vivid omen of approaching night. The locals in the nearby village had all warned me to steer clear. They told stories of a spectral knight that roamed the corridors, forever bound by an unholy duty to guard a relic capable of ensnaring human souls. In my ambition, or perhaps foolhardiness, I decided that only I could uncover the truth hidden within these twisted halls. From a distance, the fortress looked like a cluster of jagged teeth rising out of the earth. Crumbling ramparts threatened to collapse at any minute. Gaping holes in the walls resembled black mouths yearning to devour intruders. Even if one disregarded the legends, the architectural state was warning enough. Step inside at your own peril, it seemed to say, yet I remained transfixed, certain there was more to be found than just rubble and rumors. I made my way across a bridge that looked as if a single misstep would send me careening into the moat-like chasm below. Once across, I entered the courtyard where thorny vines crawled up pillars and nibbled at dislodged stones. Rusty gates teased with half-broken hinges. A cautious hush permeated the air, occasionally punctuated by the screech of a bat or the rasp of my own breath, magnified too loudly by my swirling anxiety. There was no sign of the living, only an oppressive hush that heralded the arrival of something else. Inside the courtyard, a battered statue of a knight stood atop a fractured pedestal. The carving was rough, its features partly eroded. Still, I could make out the stern expression on the knight's face. His sword was raised, as though to ward off some unseen threat on the horizon. It struck me, then, had this statue been placed here as a warning or a memorial to the fortress's real guardian? Legend said the spectral knight had once been a valiant defender of his lord's lands. When war ravaged the region, he and others undertook a quest that led them to discover a relic of unimaginable power. But the relic, imbued with a malevolence that outweighed any notion of honor, had enslaved the knight's soul, forcing him to patrol these corridors long after his mortal life had ended. A door to the fortress's main hall stood at the far side of the courtyard, battered by time and weather. It bore the deep scars of battle, and an unsettling gloom seemed to radiate from the dark seam around its frame. I approached it cautiously, glancing back at the statue. Though inert, I swore I felt an otherworldly presence trailing behind me. I pried the door open, wincing at the wail of rusted hinges echoing through the cold halls. The interior corridor stretched before me, illuminated only by the last rays of dusk slipping through arrow slits in the walls. Drifting dust motes sparkled like faint ghosts, swirling around every footstep I took. The stench of mildew tested my resolve. Each step produced a muffled echo, as though the fortress was devouring my presence, absorbing me into its dim labyrinth. The old rumor rapped at the back of my mind. Once you wander too far into these depths, the relic hungers for your soul. I continued onward, following the tattered remnants of tapestries that clung along the corridor. Scenes of glorious battle and regal banquets were so faded they resembled bleached skeletons of their former artistry. Occasional gusts of wind blasted through the cracks in the walls, making the tapestries snap, almost as if they were waving me away in warning. Still, I pressed forward, compelled by a mixture of dread and fascination. A turn in the passageway revealed a steep staircase spiraling upward. Moonlight now illuminated the steps. Each stone was uneven, worn by centuries of marching feet, some belonging no doubt to the specter of the night. The echo of those non-existent footsteps reverberated in my ears as if an entire legion marched parallel with me in the swirling gloom. When I reached the top, I found a circular chamber that must have once been a watchtower. A shattered wooden table lay at the center, its remains strewn across the floor. Part of the roof had collapsed, revealing a rectangle of night sky. Piles of rubble and fallen beams made the area difficult to navigate. I stumbled forward, trying not to catch my foot on the debris. Suddenly I felt it. A wave of presence, a current of cold dread sweeping into the chamber. My heart thundered, feet turning to lead. Before I fully comprehended what was happening, a figure took shape in the darkness at the far edge of the room. The ghostly knight stood there, clad in half-moon armor, carved from moonlight and sorrow. His visor was lowered, the metal etched with ancient insignia. A spectral sword dangled from his gloved hands. Shadows filtered through him, as if his form only half existed on this earthly plane. The faint clank of armor felt like the denouement of some dreadful dream. Beneath his visor, a ghastly glow leered out. I could not move, not at first. Thoughts of running warred with my burning curiosity. In the end, perhaps fearing that attempting to flee might provoke it, I stood my ground. The knight raised his sword in a silent challenge, as though beckoning me deeper, commanding me not to turn away. In his movement I sensed not simple hostility, but a sorrow-laden duty, a compulsion to stand between me and something else. The air around him surged with an uncanny energy, thick and cloying as congealed blood. In a trembling voice, I dared to speak. "What do you guard?" I asked softly, though my words were likely swallowed by the gloom. Yet to my astonishment, the spectre lowered his sword. His helmet turned slightly, as though scanning me with curiosity. I saw the flicker of intangible eyes behind that visor, a tortured soul, desperate to communicate but trapped in the confines of an undead sentinel's mission. With ghostly grace, the knight motioned toward the far side of the room, where a narrow hallway led deeper into the fortress. Then he disappeared, his image collapsing into wisps of gray light that evaporated in the stale air. My pulse hammered in my ears. Part of me wanted to interpret the gesture as an invitation to proceed. Another part argued that the relic's curse was beckoning, and I was stepping straight into a trap. Still, I could not turn away. I ventured forward down the corridor, my torch casting fleeting shapes on the stone walls. The hallway led to a set of stairs, spiraling downwards, deeper into the fortress's bowels. I imagined dungeons riddled with rusted chains and dried blood, but as I descended, the fissures in the walls flickered with an eerie phosphorescent glow. The corridor opened into a grand sub-hall, once splendid with carved pillars and sweeping arches. Now the pillars were half collapsed, and the arches threatened to crumble at the slightest provocation. A pervasive sense of dread distorted my perception, the edges of my vision blurring as if I were crossing into another realm. A broad staircase descended from the heart of the sub-hall, flanked by massive statues of robed figures. Each statue gripped a stone chain in its hand, the links coiling around rotted pillars. Their expressions were reverent, as though worshipping something unspeakable below. I heard a distant echo. Was it chanting or just the wind scraping across the fortress walls? My legs trembled, but I forced myself down the steps. The deeper I went, the more the fortress seemed to pulse like a living entity. The walls were moist, oozing with some foul condensation. Flickers of movement made me glance over my shoulder more than once, but there was never anyone there. Or so I tried to believe. Twice, I thought I heard the soft scrape of steel on stone, perhaps the night trailing me invisible, or other phantoms lurking in the gloom. Then I came to a crypt-like room, the centerpiece of which was a massive altar made of black stone. It rose from the floor like a malignant tumor, its surface etched with strange runes that pulsated in time with my accelerating heartbeat. Torches burned in rusted sconces around the chamber's circumference, their flames producing an unnatural green glow. That meant someone, or something, had prepared this place. Here, the air was thick with the stench of old decay and the tang of unimaginable sorcery. In the center of the altar, a small object hovered above a twisted iron pedestal. It glistened, reflecting the ghostly green light. From across the chamber, I felt its magnetic pull. It lured me closer, each step fueled by dread-laced compulsion. At last I stood just an arm's length away. The relic appeared to be a small orb or jewel, impossibly clear yet tinged with swirling gray shapes inside. At times it looked like swirling smoke. At others, like wailing faces pressed against the crystal surface, trapped in eternal torment. A wave of nausea assaulted me, and I nearly lost my footing. It was as if an unspoken voice whispered in my mind, urging me, "Yours for the taking, if only you dare." Staring into the relic, I sensed countless souls squirming inside, scratching at invisible walls, screaming in silent agony. It was horrifying. I wanted to look away, but my gaze was locked. Claustrophobic terror gripped me as I realized these were the enslaved, bound to do the relic's bidding or be lost forever in its swirling void. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw the spectral knight materialize again, standing beside the altar. He moved slowly, as a doomed guardian forced into a centuries-old vigil. Every step resonated with a metallic echo that seemed to rattle in my ribcage. His gaze, or what I presumed to be his gaze, fixed on me, pleading and forbidding at once. Before I had sensed hostility or warning, but now I felt a deeper sorrow overshadowing him. The faint murmur of voices grew in the corners of the room, as though other souls drifted there bound by the same curse. Driven by a sudden burst of courage or madness, I lowered my hand to the hilt of a dagger I wore at my belt. Perhaps I thought I could defend myself from the phantom with mere steel. My voice cracked when I spoke. "If you protect this relic, then you protect an abomination. Why do you persist?" For a moment he stood motionless. Then, in a swirl of luminous mist, he raised his free hand to the side of his helmet, lifting the visor. The sight within nearly made me drop to my knees. The face, though faint and translucent, bore an expression of infinite despair. Dull eyes glowed blue in their sunken sockets. The corners of his mouth twisted in eternal remorse. My heartbeat pounded in crescendo, and I felt tears of dread slip from my eyes. The spectral knight opened his mouth, and though his words were inaudible, I sensed his voice reverberating in my own mind. He had been a mortal knight once, indeed. His name was lost to time, replaced by an endless duty. His lord had commanded him to guard the relic, but the knight realized too late the nature of the object he swore to protect. By then, the relic's curse had taken hold, chaining him to this unholy fortress. He had tried to defy his oath, to destroy the relic, but each time he attempted it, unspeakable agony lashed his spirit, forcing him back into submission. Now, he haunted these halls, neither dead nor alive, required to bar entry to any traveler who might threaten the relic, yet also, in his own twisted way, praying someone would vanquish him and free the souls within. Anguished sympathy overcame me. I looked at the orb again, imagining the tortured remnants swirling inside. I reached out to touch it, and in that instant, the relic radiated a furious glow. The swirling gray shapes within contorted, pressing their faces against the shimmering surface. My arm felt heavy, as though something was drawing the very life from me. I recoiled in shock. The relic flared again, and an unexpected force surged against my mind. Like a vortex, it tried to drag me into the swirling gray shapes, threatening to merge my spirit with that chaos. I faltered, collapsing to one knee. The spectral knight loomed over me then, raising his sword with trembling arms. For a horrifying second, I thought he was about to strike me down. Instead, the tip of his blade quivered, struggling between the relic's vile compulsion and the knight's final shred of humanity. He roared a silent wail, and with that, I could feel him resisting the relic's control, appalled by the notion of delivering another soul into torment. The clash between his forced duty and his moral rebellion caused the knight's form to flicker in and out of existence. The entire cavern raged with spectral winds, howling as though the fortress itself lamented centuries of misery. A jagged rent tore through the air around the knight, an unholy rift swirling with black and green plumes. It was as though, in that moment, the fortress boundaries were bending, letting in a glimpse of a realm where souls were harvested. In the nauseating swirl of shapes, I glimpsed other spirits howling in a darkness beyond comprehension. Desperate to do something, anything, I lunged for the orb again, ignoring the mind-numbing cold seeping into my bones. My fingers brushed the relic's surface. Instantly, the swirling faces began multiplying, their wails drilling into my psyche. Yet I refused to let go. I thought of the knight's tortured face, his centuries of penance. I thought of the countless souls trapped inside. With every ounce of my will, I tried to force the relic toward the edge of the altar, to cast it down onto the cold stone floor. But a searing pain gripped my arms, as though thousands of tiny claws were tearing into my very essence. My vision swam, glaring with dark spots. Even so, I inched it forward, feeling no weight in my hands but every ounce of malignant force resisting me. A subtle crack formed at the orb's surface, the swirling shapes inside writhing in panic. The green flames and the torches sputtered wildly, and the altar itself rumbled. Each breath felt like glass shards slicing my lungs. Suddenly, with an echoing crack, the orb slipped free of my nerveless fingers. It fell from the altar, shattering on the stone floor with a thunderous crash. An ear-splitting wail resonated through the chamber. I clamped my hands over my ears, too late to shut out the wave of torment. The swirling shapes roiled outward in a flood of spectral forms, dozens, then hundreds, shrieking in half-coherent agony. Their cries rattled in my mind, and I feared I had unleashed something even worse than the relic's bondage. In the midst of that maelstrom, I glimpsed the ghostly knight. His steadfast silhouette remained. He stumbled forward, kneeling as an immense stream of white and gray phantasms twisted around him. One by one, the ghostly shapes fluttered away, dissipating like scattered ashes in a gust of wind. In their eyes shone an odd mixture of relief and fear. Freed at last, they feared lingering too long would drag them back. In moments, all that remained was a stillness so profound, I questioned if I had lost my ability to hear. Then the knight rose, leaning on his spectral sword. Swirls of faint blue light radiated from his armor, as though the relic's destruction had begun dissolving his ancient bonds. He met my gaze one last time. His visage softened from the horrors I had seen. His armor flickered, cracked with pale luminescence, and I sensed an overwhelming gratitude emanating from him. In a slow, deliberate gesture, he bowed, an archaic sign of respect. Then his form dispersed into silver motes of light that drifted away on currents unseen, leaving me alone in the suffocating darkness. My entire body shook from the ordeal. Bruises formed where unseen forces had gripped me, my breath ragged, heart still pounding. I stared at the shattered fragments of the orb. Thin wisps of gray smoke rose from its remains, before vanishing into the air. A black, viscous stain marred the floor beneath it, pulsing faintly and then receding, as if the fortress were devouring the last traces of the relic's power. With effort, I stood and scanned the now silent chamber. The green torches no longer burned. All that remained were dull embers, a reminder of the malevolent energy that had fled this place. Even the architecture seemed less menacing, the pillars and walls no longer bending inward like hungry mouths. I felt neither relief nor triumph, only a weary acceptance that the relic's horrors had ended, but at incalculable cost across untold centuries. Though my legs wobbled, I forced myself to leave. I climbed the stairs back into the corridor, my torchlight diminishing with every flicker. The fortress now felt as though it were in a deep slumber. No moans echoed in the passageways, no scraping of metal on stone reverberated. Where once I had heard the sorrowful presence of restless souls, there now reigned only the emptiness of a place that had lost its unholy master. Passing again through the courtyard, I could hardly comprehend the shift. The statue of the knight still stood, its form partially illuminated by moonlight. This time the stoic face, carved in stone, seemed gentler. Or perhaps I only wished it so. The battered gate yawned open to the night outside, beckoning me to leave this place behind. I stepped onto the rickety bridge leading away from the fortress. My steps felt weightless, as if I'd already become a phantom, wandering a half-forgotten memory. In the distance lay the village, its flickering lanterns a promise of life, warmth, and sanity. A breeze touched my face, carrying the faintest echo of a grateful sigh, the final whisper of a knight whose spirit had found release after centuries of torment. I paused once on the bridge, glancing back over my shoulder. The fortress loomed silently against the night sky, walls cast in silvered silhouette. The oppressive gloom that had once emanated from it lay dormant, or perhaps entirely gone. Though the fortress's ruin remained, it felt drained of the menacing aura that had once held it captive to the Relic's curse. For a moment, I could almost imagine it as a simple ruin, nothing more than ancient stone battered by time. As I walked on, a swirl of conflicting emotions churned within me. Relief that the Relic was no more, sorrow for all who had suffered under it, and a lingering dread of the malevolence I had witnessed. I knew it would be impossible to forget the hollow faces in the orb, or the spectral night's silent anguish. Perhaps the fortress would collapse in some future storm, burying the last traces of fallen banners in mold-covered corridors. Perhaps a new legend would rise in its place, overshadowing the horrors once sealed within. But for me, the memory of that ghostly guardian would forever be etched in my mind. The image of his battered armor dissolving into silver motes remained seared into my heart. Though he had existed long past mortality, bound to a duty he despised, he had retained enough humanity to spare me, to guide me in destroying that wretched artifact. In the end, he succeeded in freeing the Relic's captives and freeing himself. Night's shadows enshrouded the path before me, but the moon illuminated my way enough to keep going until I reached the outskirts of the village. The wind carried the echo of my own ragged breathing, and my shoulders finally slumped with exhaustion. Even the houses, nestled close together for safety, seemed ghostly in the dim light. A single lantern glowed in a window, promising respite. Perhaps I would rouse the innkeeper, share my story in hushed tones, and watch his eyes grow wide with fear and awe. Or perhaps I would keep my silence, letting the fortress fade into the darkness of its own legend. Yet, a final realization struck me. I'll never truly leave that fortress behind. Not in my mind, not in my nightmares. The fortress might crumble, the relic might lie in shards, but some scars refuse to heal. The impression of an ancient oath, a sorrowful night, and an enslaving relic had been carved into my very soul. Even if I tried to banish it from memory, the fortress would remain, waiting among the jagged outlines of distant hills, where the wind howls like the screams of condemned spirits. And in that haunted space, though the relic no longer enslaves the living, the story of the ghostly guardian lingers, a testament to the darkness that once reigned, and to the faint spark of hope that can still arise amid ruins.